Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the York Festival Ideas and welcome to Mortality Hour. My name is Tim Doran. I'm going to be chairing this evening. It's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening. It's Ricard Solé, and he's from the University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, where he's head of the Complex Systems Lab. And he also has a side gig at the Santa Fe Institute in the United States. And he's author of Phase Transitions and a co-author of Viruses as Complex Adaptive Systems. But this evening, we're going to be talking about his latest book, which is out next month, Endless Endings, The Many Forms of Death and What They Teach Us About Life. And so in this book, Ricard's going to explore the different meanings of death in its varied forms and reflecting on questions that are pushing the frontiers of scientific understanding. And as he's going to reveal, life's endings can be just as fascinating and varied as life itself. So, Ricard, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here. So I'm glad to be here, unfortunately not in person. And I'm going to explain a little bit about my book. And I would like to start kind of explaining how it happen. This book comes as a translation from a book that appeared in Spanish, Todas las Muertes, would be something like All the Deaths. And now in Princeton, they changed the title to Endless Endings. With this beautiful cover, I have to say my students, who are very funny people, say that it's going to be a very successful book because it looks like a self-help book, those that are selling the airports. Yeah, you know, these kind of people. I would like to mention that the motivation for this book comes from a kind of a childhood interest in Frankenstein. When I was a kid, I remember watching the Hollywood version of the novel, which is not exactly faithful to the book. But I was amazingly fascinated by these ideas and the science and the drama and the potential for all this. And at some point in the Science Biennale in Barcelona in 2019, 200 years after Mary Shelley's publication of Frankenstein, I had this great opportunity to talk about that in what they call the Night of the Museums, which means that late afternoon, late evening, there are talks in all places, in all museums. And I had this amazing chance of talking in this setup, the old Barcelona Academy of Medicine, where you can see the old place. Here in the center is this table where the doctors made the dissections of the corpses. So great place. It was 10 p.m. on a night in winter, so everybody came here because they really wanted, and it was a fantastic opportunity to talk about all this. And so the idea was to talk about what is the state of the art concerning the ideas that Shelley presented 200 years ago, now in the era of bioengineering, synthetic biology, artificial intelligence. And one particular thing that is in the book that I mentioned to my students, I teach students in a degree of bioengineering, is this saying in the book where Victor Frankenstein said that to understand life, we first need to understand death. And I'm a complex systems scientist. I've been working for 35 years in trying to understand the origins and evolution of complexity. And death, indeed, has been kind of a central topic that appears again and again in very different contexts. So one first thing we could say is, so what is death? How do you define death? And that's not a trivial question. I would like, though, to illustrate that with something I discuss in the book, with the death of a single cell. So this is an organism that has a free life. You see it under the microscope, and this organism is achieving the end of his life. And as you will see at some point, it kind of disintegrates. This illustrates an important idea, is that if I measure everything here right now, I will say the same amount of carbon, of nitrogen, oxygen, the proteins, et cetera, all the matter is there. But there's something clearly different, something that is distinct. In a way, you can think in this in the previous state where this matter is organized in a special way. What is in the second one is the same matter, but you have lost something. And that's one of the things that science has explained us. One of the clear points that we can make about how death happens is when cells are unable to maintain their integrity, the inside and the outside. There's a lot of investing in energy for cells to do that. And once this fails, death comes about. But there's more than that. This is the cell, the death of a cell, but we are made of billions of cells. We are multicellular organisms. And it's very interesting to know, and that's kind of one of the great findings of modern biology, that actually to construct organisms, to build complex life, we need death, some particular kind of death that we call programmed cell death. Meaning what? Well, in your bodies, every single day, millions of cells die in a programmed way. Why is that? Because there's a genetic kind of programming that says, well, you are old enough, it's time to not replicate or die. But also, and that's extremely important, because cells receive signals from other cells that tell them if everything is all right. And if something seems wrong, cells have an internal program to kill themselves. That happens all the time. And also, cell death, this programmed cell death, is a special death that is intrinsic to our genetic machinery, is used to build the embryos. So we go to this amazing process from one cell to billions of cells. And a large part of what's going on here has to do not only with growth, but with death. So to sculpt organs, arms, all kinds of structures, you need death to be there operating. So how does it emerge? How does programmed cell death even happen? What's the origin of that? And very interestingly, that's a beautiful story. It happened in the oceans, in the old oceans. Everything indicates that programmed cell death is a consequence of brutal arms races between bacteria, particularly cyanobacteria, bacteria that do photosynthesis, and viruses that inhabit the seas. Actually, we know that this kind of constant arms race happens every single day. Meaning what? Meaning that viruses invade a population of cells. They spread out. There's an enormous amount of death. And what we discovered is that one way of stopping propagation, like a kind of a little pandemic within, for example, these ocean vortices, we have trillions of bacteria. One way of stopping that is to make a system that actually kills cells. Imagine that you detect that viruses are there, are killing other cells, and you can actually trigger a signal that kills yourself. Doesn't seem a good strategy, but if that happens in a massive scale, viruses stop spreading. So this original programmed cell death became recruited by biology to many, many, many different things, and also helped us understand a number of phenomena that had to do with multicellular complexity, in particular death, regeneration, and the problem and the quest of immortality. So you have cell death, which in our bodies, in these multicellular bodies, is acting all the time in conflict with regeneration. We have constantly cells that reproduce themselves and cells that die in such a way that, like in Theseus' ship, after a year, almost every single cell of our body is different. So one thing that has been explored pretty much, and particularly these days, is whether we can actually use regeneration that in some organisms make them immortal to make us immortal ourselves. And here's the thing, hydras, like this one here, or jellyfish, and some plants can be essentially immortal. They regenerate over and over and over again. And some jellyfish actually can even put back the morphogenetic programming and get younger if they are under stress, and then get back into the adult form. But there's a price for that. There's a price for being immortal. And as you can see, these are extremely simple kind of organisms, right? The price we pay for having this amazing brain that we can use to do incredible things is that very likely immortality is not for us. So for humans, death is, of course, something extremely important. Many reasons, right? We fear death. Death has probably been the trigger of religions. And you could say that if you try to understand the origins of that, there's not much to see because, language, minds, they don't seem to leave fossils, but that's not completely true. And I want to point out that actually one of the things that is brought, but for example, from cave art, is a number of glimpses that we can see of the complex mind emerging. And I'll let you know why this connects with death. We believe that what made us a singular species has to do with several components that involve getting to synergy. Language was one of them, a complex language. Our capacity for understanding the emotions of others. Or sometimes this is said, this is called in neuroscience as mind reading. In a way, we identify what are you feeling, right? Are you scared? Are you a danger to me? And a third incredibly important component is time. So we managed to have a understanding of time that is not just that we have amazing memories, we can go back in time mentally, but something more extraordinary. We can go into the future, think and imagine multiple futures and project ourselves into the future. So many people think that actually, and that's kind of the evidence we see in the art, in the cave art and in other evidences we have from paleontology, from the study of ancient humans, is that if you combine these things, if you understand time, you see other people around that disappear, you can project yourself into that future and understand also that death is something that is about you. And I also put cave art because this is an extraordinary thing, right? It's a revolution here. The cave art is not for just the people that is around you, it's for communicating with the future. So how do we address that? How do we manage to actually look scientifically to these problems? There's been enormous advances, especially in neuroscience. Many of us believe that the 21st century will be certainly the century of the brain and the mind. And one of the central topics in our understanding of the brain, of course, has been understanding the networks that are formed by neurons. We do know that it's not just understanding single neurons are just pieces of a big puzzle, but understanding how the networks are organized. I always say that neurons are a beautiful kind of cell. If you look at the cells of the pancreas, of the gut, of the liver, you will identify cells that have special properties for different things. Neurons have this incredibly branched structure. Why so many branches? Because neurons are specialized into looking for information, into connecting. And that of course, has been kind of the engine of the revolution that we are also experiencing now. It connects again with the topic of death in many ways, because there's been a lot of controversial discussions about that. We live in this time where apparently it's possible to mimic the mind in some ways. The neural networks that you are using all the time with ChatGPT and other systems are essentially huge black boxes where we understand as much of them as we understand our own brain. And that has brought a lot of ideas and philosophical discussions, in particular this discussion that maybe it's possible to use this kind of architectures to make us immortal. In the book, I kind of try to provide counter arguments to that idea. It's far, far, far away in any kind of technological future and has many drawbacks for several reasons. And again, for the brain, there's something that I also try to bring in the book, which is the deaths of the mind. We talk about death usually in some kind of unique, specific way, but there are many things that happen in the brain along the life, at the beginning and at the end. This picture is kind of an experiment that we brought in an exhibition called Brains that I co-curated in Barcelona. And there was an artist who made this particular installation where essentially you do the following thing. You write in a piece of paper what you think is your first memory of childhood. And then you locate this in this kind of axis from 0 to 8 years. If you look at the picture, you'll see that about between 3 and 4 years, there's a big peak. And why is that? Is this something that is kind of random? It is not. Neuroscience has shown that actually there's a very interesting phenomenon that happens about 3 years of age when the hippocampus, which is an amazing structure that is inside our brains, it's a symmetric structure, responsible for things that are extremely important. For example, creating the memories. So you create memories thanks to this structure. You also have a spatial memory in the hippocampus. And about 3 years, this gets incredibly reorganized. Again, cell death plays a very important role. Neurons reconnect in fundamental ways and prepare you for adult life. But that implies what I call the death of childhood memories. So everything below 3 years essentially is erased. So you cannot remember when you stand up. You cannot remember when you were walking with your mom and you watch her from your small stature. That's kind of an amazing thing. And that's not the only one. There's several transitions that happen in the brain as it matures, and they're kind of inevitable. I must say that some people in the exhibition put themselves as in 0. Like I remember when I became a human and saw the light, etc. But it's kind of a dubious thing. And there's a kind of a counter view of that has to be with the decay of brains, right? And that's for Alzheimer. And I try to point out in the book this quite fascinating connection between childhood and Alzheimer. In childhood, about 2 years, language becomes the central thing in our brain. We jump from using 1, 2 words into the full grammar. About the same age, we start identifying ourselves in a mirror. So consciousness comes about. Not so later, you can see that children also are able to understand past from future. In Alzheimer, there's a kind of a deconstruction process that follows kind of the inverse process. You have a loss of neurons. The hippocampus is one of the areas that suffers from this. So the brain shrinks in time. And you see this process where language starts to be difficult. It's difficult to understand what is past and planned future. Eventually, consciousness disappears. And in the middle there, you also lost the understanding of time itself, right? When it's past, what is future. Actually, there's many examples of phenomena that go around this. Like, for example, this student of mine who told me that her grandma, who was educated in the north of Spain, speaking Galician as a child, she went to Madrid as a teenager, and he knew her when she was an adult, speaking Spanish for many years. Eventually, she got Alzheimer, and he was telling me, well, I went to see my grandma, and he's speaking in Galician all the time, and he's speaking about her mom and her dad, as if she had moved in a time machine to the back, to the past. And here I put you this drawing by a painter, Utermoller, who is a very famous case where he kept making self-portraits of himself over time. As you can see, there's the distortion of space, which accompanies this in kind of disintegration of the capacity for understanding the world. But I do mention in the book also that there are extraordinary things that we still need to figure out. And one of the examples that I mentioned is these nuns that were avid readers, had an intellectual capacity. So nuns with more than 100 years old. But they had a mind of the 60s person. And they agreed after death that their brains could be examined. And guess what? An important fraction of this woman have a brain that a pathologist will identify as advanced Alzheimer. But they didn't show any symptom of that, which tells us that something incredibly important, has been rewired, probably thanks to being avid readers all their life and having a big intellectual life. And there are other ways in which the mind can die. And I put this example by Christopher Hitchens from his biography. I also recommend his little last book on mortality, on his own death, where he mentions this example of a girl in Rwanda after the genocide, where she says she survived, but she said, nobody that I know, friends, family, survived. So nobody knows who she was, right? It's kind of a dramatic example that kind of illustrates the impact of genocide beyond death. I also try to emphasize that we live in this special time where machines are becoming part of our lives in kind of unexpected ways. And one example that I found especially intriguing was this example of robots that are pets that are around our lives. And in Japan in particular, these Aibo robots, which were made by Sony, but at some point Sony didn't work with them anymore, didn't have the capacity for repairing them. So these dogs, you can say that they died. And they made these Shintoist funerals, and was felt as a big loss by the owners. And it's interesting that now we live in a moment where this is happening probably in a different way through these large language model systems, where many people become strongly attached to these, you could say, non-living systems. And then there's two more things I wanted to mention: the death of languages, and related to that, the death of information. We also live in this moment in the last decades in particular, where we see the loss, the extinction of languages. Here is not like species, it's not the death in the same way, but as soon as the last speaker goes, the language disappears. And this has created a kind of an important, maybe a huge gap of loss, because the death of language means in many cases also the loss of knowledge. And this in particular, a number of studies that indicate that for native languages that have been used for centuries to actually inform and build a memory of the role played by plants as medicinal remedies. A lot of the things that these people discover from generations to generations is probably getting lost. I want to be a bit positive. So we do lose languages, but maybe one positive message comes from artificial intelligence. Not all the messages are positive, of course, but one of the things that we can actually take advantage of is that artificial intelligence has amazing capacity for finding hidden correlations, for gathering data in unexpected ways. And one of the frontiers that is being explored has to do with languages that are lost, languages that nobody speaks anymore, and we don't have enough information to reconstruct, to decode them, right? These Discofaistos, the Gorongoro from Eastern Island. But then recently, I want to point out this as a great example. We have seen how artificial intelligence has helped to bring back texts that were supposed to be never going to be read, like these hundreds of scrolls that remain unread in the museums from Herculaneum. Herculaneum was this city close to Pompeii that was also buried from the eruption. And these are the scrolls completely charred. Everybody thought this is going to be impossible to read. You cannot unroll them without destroying. But guess what? There's one way of combining synchrotron radiation to actually detect what is the ink, the few remain ink inside these systems, and then train an artificial intelligence to artificially unroll the rolls. And guess what? We just recently saw the text of the first rolls that have been decoded, and they can be read. So an amazing amount of things are going to be found here. And as a final thing, there's information. I think this is a especially important chunk of the idea of death in our society. I put the pictures here because you see that in so many instances. I always was impressed in these flea markets to see these chunks of photographs from unknown people that were probably, probably they were deceased, and everything went into the flea market. And I tend to think, I mean, these people is like me, right? Probably they were also standing exactly in the same place I was. You see soldiers that maybe go into the war, see a couple that appears happy. What is all this information gone? And we live in this special era also, where the ways in which we store information have changed again and again, multiple times. From the archives in libraries to the storage of computers that has been changing quickly over time. Each time that this change happens, there's a lot of information that will eventually get lost. And I mentioned in the book also, even big files from NASA that were stored, thousands and thousands of bits of information are likely to have been lost forever. So one of the things that I would like to emphasize as a final thought, in the past, if you want to destroy information, you want to kill information, the strategy was very clear. You burn the library, you kill the author. This is a photograph of the Sarajevo's library when the Balkans War was ongoing. It's a very sad story because the Serbian military, on purpose, they bombed the library to destroy it, and also shot to the librarians when they tried to go and rescue the documents. And millions of documents and thousands completely unique books disappeared. This is an old story. This is an old story. If you, when I was writing the book, I went back into studying how many times this happened, and it's quite amazing and sad that we have been destroying books so many times. From Plato, believe it or not, he put some effort into destroying the books of others, to the modern times. But it's interesting to know that there's another way of killing information without burning it. And that's, I will say, that's something that tells us a lot about how unpredictable is the ongoing history of humanity. Because who would have thought that the best way of killing information is creating another kind of information, something that we call misinformation. Misinformation is the best way of destroying the information that you don't want to be circulating. We have made a number of studies showing that misinformation, because of its nature, propagates much better than information, which is then a kind of an ecological process. So misinformation wins over information as a species that is able to conquer the grounds of the other one. And that has derived into really problematic endings. In Don't Look Up, I think that they reflect this very well. The science denial that is around these days, and that it was becoming a big thing after the pandemic and during the pandemic, is telling us that we have to work with a problem that is extremely difficult to manage. In particular, misinformation has led into something that challenges our civilization and our democracy, which is particularly polarization. Polarization is an effect that has been just accelerating over and over again. It's one of the big consequences of misinformation. It's not clear at all how can we address that. And in fact, how do we solve it? Because as Caroline Emke tells in this book, Against Hate, hate is part of the story. In the book, she says that she kind of admires the people who hates, because they are so sure And she points out that if you are not sure, you cannot hate. But that's kind of the conundrum, because that's not only that I don't believe what you think, I'm not just having a different point of view, but for many people is that I hate you. So how you unravel this, how you kind of make this disappear, that's something that at the end of the book, I point out that this is really a matter of life or death. And I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricard. That's given us a lot to think about. So whilst the questions are sort of coming through, I'm going to sort of start with a couple of my own through Chair's prerogative. So just a couple of things that you touched on during your talk. One about the sort of awareness of death, and you mentioned that you think the awareness of death is perhaps a driver of religious belief. And I think Ernest Becker, his book, The Denial of Death, sort of went even further than that. He said awareness of mortality is a primary driver of the whole of human culture, of civilization, of symbolic life generally. Everything from, religion to art to even political ideology is essentially an elaborate defense mechanism against the terror of annihilation. So you're approaching death sort of more scientifically than psychologically, but do you think Becker was right? And do you think that science can help us confront death more honestly? Or do you think it's just giving us a new set of denial mechanisms, a promise of digital immortality or the conquest of aging?
Okay, you're making several questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I want to make clear one thing that I think it's important, and I guess I've been able to also point out in the book, which is that as much as a scientist, I want to understand death because it's important for us to understand life. There's the side as humans, which I guess it connects with what you're asking here, which is that death of people we love represents kind of a loss that even you have the best scientist is in a way is incomprehensible, right? It's not like something because I understand life, it makes sense to accept that. But this is true that you are bringing. I mean, of course, death is a major topic, right? Cormac McCarthy once said that death is almost everything around, you want it or not, right? And it's interesting to see that as religions kind of lose some power, at least maybe in the Western world, artificial intelligence and this promise of this singularity thing, right? That technology, in a way or another, will bring some kind of immortality. I think this is a pretty unreasonable claim, but is for many people kind of being kind of consolation, like maybe something achievable, right? That in a way or another we can have maybe a much longer life. Biology doesn't seem to suggest this is possible, or even be immortal by being uploaded into some kind of hardware, right? Which I also think it's quite unreasonable.
Yeah, we've had a sort of question on that about whether you think we'd ever be able to upload our hippocampus or the contents of our hippocampus, and I guess you've answered that. But another question you could ask is, do you think we should if we could? So if we did develop the means to do that, do you think it's something we should be doing?
Well, personally, I don't think so. I have many arguments against the technological feasibility of that, but also the cost, even in thinking in some future, some utopian or dystopian future where we have energy resources that allow to build big machines. Even reconstructing of a millimeter side of the brain in a faithful way is an extremely expensive task, not yet solved. So to scale that into something that is almost 100 billion neurons it's something that if you make the numbers for a single person, that could be much, much expensive than building a large particle accelerator.
Yeah.
So who could be able to get there, right? Not many people.
And probably the people we don't want to get there as well. So another question, yeah, I'm just thinking about your research in complexity theory. How's that informed your ideas about the brain and about death?
Well, for the brain, one central idea of complexity that sometimes is misunderstood is emergence, right? Emergent in the sense that for those of us who follow the scientific method, some people call us materialists, but I think it's a totally misleading way of labeling anything. It's quite clear that the minds come from our brains. It's not separated. It's the dynamical state of the brain. And that's an emergent phenomenon that looking at single neurons and concentrating in the single pieces of the system does not explain anything, right? You need to go into the system properties.
Yeah.
It's not a mystery. It's something that we can deal with, right? It's a difficult task, but we have unraveled a lot of stuff. And about death, well, again, a big chunk of complexity theory comes from evolutionary theory. So our understanding of what were the steps that in a way or another have shaped life. What I was mentioning of programmed cell death is one example. I mean, understanding that what's the origins of that. It's been important also because it reveals a lot about diseases that in a way or another, this fails. I didn't mention, but for example, who can be immortal? Cancer can be immortal, right? Immortal in two senses. In one sense, that is true. We have these HeLa cells that come from a single tumor from a woman, and we have the legs, and this is now thousands and thousands of kilograms of is around. It's immortal, and of course, within our bodies, that immortality has a limit, right? So cancer cells can keep growing, no limits until they kill us, of course.
And I'm just saying, you've both in your book and in your presentation today, you've touched on Frankenstein and other sort of more artistic expressions rather than just sort of scientific books as well. So do you aside from Frankenstein, which other sort of works of art or which might be, paintings, there might be films, there might be literature, do you think best captures life and death?
Oh, okay. Well, as you've read my book, you know that I like a lot to use movies so as a way of backing up things. Yeah, there's plenty of them. I mean, if you think, for example, in memory, which is a kind of a central aspect of life that makes us humans in particular, the loss of memory is one way of dying, right?
Yeah.
If you lose your memory of who you are, you could say you're alive as a biological entity, but not anymore as a human. And Memento and other films that play this idea of what if your memory is impaired, for example. I know a lot of neuroscientists who use that in their talks about the rise and fall of memory.
Yeah, I think for those of you who don't know Memento, I think was it Christopher Nolan's first film, certainly one of his first films.
Yes,
and
I think.
Since becoming honest on that, and it's about a man who essentially can't recall anything from more than about a minute ago. So he keeps forgetting, and he doesn't know where he is from moment to moment, and so he has to write down the really important things, and and the really really important things he sort of gets tattooed on his skin.
Yes.
And so it's it's a one of those sort of typical constructions that part of the film is playing forwards and part of it is playing backwards. So yeah.
Nolan has played very well with these things, and the other movie that I like very much is the how is the name in English? These magicians that
The Prestige.
The Prestige, yeah.
The Prestige, yeah.
Where he actually plays with it. I don't want to make spoilers. He plays with this idea of, I cannot say anything because it's easy to make a spoiler.
All I can say is I know what you mean, but I for the same reasons I can't explain what you mean for anyone who's not watched it.
Let's recommend it.
Yeah, but for the person who asked, go and watch The Prestige. I think that would be a good one. So another question: have you heard of Brian Johnson and Project Blueprint? And I think it relates to the sort of the slowing down of the biological aging process.
Is this the guy who takes lots of pills every day?
I don't know. I don't know himself. I'm frantically Googling him as we speak. But I think that's what he
remember.
Yeah,
I think it's this guy. Yeah, it's a millionaire that kind of tries to sell himself as an example of how you stop aging.
Yeah, so he's I can see he's got a website where he sells stuff which will help you live forever. So that might be part of it. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing. You're going to get people, and you've always had that all the way through sort of human history, is people who will promise you extended life. Perhaps not in immortality, but they can extend, they can maintain your beauty, your physical youth, extend your life in some way. But there's also, within that, clearly a human desire to prolong life, which is, and again, those two things operate in parallel. And just sort of reading your book, it seems to be that you seem to be leaning more in the direction of it would be better for us psychologically and as a species to accept the limitations, our mortal limitations, as being a necessary part of who and what we are.
Yes. On the one hand, I think that the more we understand about how aging happens, because aging has become something that we start to think as a disease.
Yeah.
Which has a good side, which means that if there's a disease, we might have some treatment. Right?
Yeah.
But that means that there's a right side, I think, which is that it's not unlikely that in the future, probably by engineering our microbiomes, so it's a kind of a hidden cyborg. So our bacteria will be designed. It might be the case that we can make people have a body, and people with 90 years old with a body of 60 years old. Yeah. That's not impossible. So to improve the quality of our health. The other side of the story, like living 200 years, this is something that I think is extremely unlikely. Knowing that it's impossible in science to say this is impossible. Yeah. But things are going on. We'll learn more, and the idea that our maximum lifespan can be expanded in arbitrary ways. Yeah, I don't think much people believe that this is possible.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's sort of related to that. I mean, we're living at a point in history where I think there's and again, I'm not sure that this is new, an acute awareness of sort of planetary endings. So there's always been, particularly around millennial cults and this sort of thing that have gone back centuries, a sense that the end times are coming, or judgment is coming, or Armageddon is coming. And most mythologies have a version of the end of the world, whether it be sort of Ragnarok or Revelation or whatever it might be. But we now have, I guess, what you might call a scientific version of that, and awareness around, species extinction or ecosystem collapse or climate catastrophe. I mean, does your own thinking about death from the biological to the kind of cosmological scale helped you gain any insight about how you think we should, personally or collectively respond to those sorts of collective threats?
Well, in a way, I mean, this is the paradox of the time we live, that on the one hand, science is very solid. We have learned a lot about our planet, our climate, diversity, sustainability. So I do think we have a good picture of what should be done to keep going, right? It's as much as we worry about the future, I think that's clear. The problem is we don't seem to go into that direction. The economy seems to run into the interest of a very small group of people, and So we are in kind of a bifurcation. It's to me, it's very clear that as a species we could survive, and it's a lot of amazing stuff that science can bring if things go well, and particularly in health, for example. I mean, I remember when I was a student, and there was this idea of cancer immunotherapy and gene therapy and things like that, and we thought, wow, this is revolution. Well, it took 30 years, but now it's here, and a lot of new things are going to happen. So the hope that we should have for our future should be great. It's a pity that we are so fearful, but unfortunately, we have good reasons for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, sort of related to that, and something that you raised earlier about the progress of science. So I had a question about whether you've seen a film, and I know the answer to this because we discussed it in the green room earlier. Have you seen a film where the science at the time didn't seem possible or wasn't possible, but it's now come true with, within your lifetime since you watched the film?
Yeah. Gattaca is the example that they use in my classes. I thought it was laughable at the time.
Mm.
I mean, being a biologist and knowing genetics was like, how the hell are we going to sequence the whole genome of a person in one day,
Yeah,
right? But here we are. So that's not only real, but we sequenced the Neanderthal genome.
yeah.
How crazy is that? Right? So yeah, many things have happened. Also in Blade Runner, right? That or Hair. These are movies that bring ideas that at some point were like, well, this isn't a really far future, making an eye by engineering an eye.
Mhm.
Well, we come closer to that, and having an artificial intelligence that speaks to you
Yeah,
in a friendly way and learning from you. Well, seems that is start to happen.
yeah. It's happening very quickly.
Yeah.
So I've got another question about longevity and immortality, specifically how you think that would work for women. So you've talked about, a 90-year-old who, still looks 30, but for example, could a woman still have the fertility of a 30-year-old at the age of 90? And and could you doing that extend fertility windows? And again, I'm sort of thinking about when um, when genetic changes come in, and we know that the risk of genetic errors and trisomy and so on increase with age. And so again, is that possible? And again, should we do it? Should we have 90-year-old women who are still sort of able to bear children?
Yeah, you bring in something that has a lot of ethical,
Mm.
uh, besides the scientific part. Clearly, the age at which women are still capable of having children has been extended by a number of advances. It might be a risky business because the genetic material has also limits here.
Mhm.
It's difficult to speculate also because some things we assume that were kind of impossible to overcome. They seem to be managed by engineering. So we live in a moment that I think many of these things will be reconsidered.
Mhm.
I see an ethical problem, of course. And again, some science fiction story that, again, is coming into life, this idea that you can actually may grow a fetus inside a separated compartment
Mhm.
and feed and maintain, or more recently, grew up a chicken inside an artificial egg.
Yeah.
This is becoming reality, which I mean, 20 years ago, we could have thought that this is pretty much in the far future.
Mhm.
So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, again, another science fiction book would be Brave New World. So in there they have them in hatcheries, right? So and they go on tours outside the cities to see communities where women still, deliver their own babies.
Yeah.
They're an extraordinary sight. It's like come and see the woman giving birth. But I guess on the fertility issue around women, I mean, men have never had an issue with that, right? So you get wealthy, high status men have been having children into their 80s. They
Yes.
just find a younger woman to couple with, or they've been freezing sperm or whatever it is. And so, if men can do it, why can't women do it? there's no reason why they shouldn't. It's just they haven't had that opportunity because of, again, the differences in the physiology.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And those differences, that's something that I don't think that can be, engineered in
Yeah,
any particular way.
yeah. And so I've got sort of one remaining question from our audience, and I'm going to try and interpret this because I'm not quite sure it's clear to me, but it might be clear to you. So does an accidental or unexpected death elicit a different neurological response? And I'm thinking whether that might be, I can't think if that's in the individual themselves because obviously they've died, but in people around them if they've experienced that.
I'm not sure you understand the question.
Yeah, I don't know, Leslie, if you want to just sort of clarify that question for us, that would be helpful, and we can sort of put it again. So I think we're sort of drawing to the end now. So again, just sort of reflecting back on the questions and your talk. I'm just wondering if there is, if you were to do, sort of revisit this book in sort of 10 years' time. I know you just got it out of your system and it's not even published yet. And we've talked about how science might change, over the next few years. Do you think your idea, your attitudes towards this are sort of relatively fixed at this point, or can you foresee, a difference in either the way that we think about death or approach death, or in the science that might make you re-examine your conclusions about death and immortality?
Oh, okay. I think I could say two things about this, about what I think could be a certainty and something that opens a Pandora's box of things that are just starting to happen.
Mhm.
One is that, as I was mentioning before, bioengineering is going forward quite quickly, quite well. And I will expect for the future that our capacity for repair of organs and improving regeneration, and so in a way, going through problems that right now are very difficult to solve, from transplants to improvement, not the brain at all, to the rest of the body. We are going to see a lot of stuff and probably affecting aging.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's a lot of uncertainties of things that are going on. If you look at this side of artificial intelligence and what I consider in the book of the death of the machines and how machines are going to get closer to humans, to living systems, right? And I mentioned this movie that I love. I think it's a fantastic movie, Robot and Frank,
Yeah.
where you have this person. I'm not going to make spoilers, but this person, this initial Alzheimer, the kids bring a humanoid robot to help. Something that is not absurd. It is something that is going to happen probably in the future. And despite in the film, it's made clear the robot is not intelligent, is not conscious. That doesn't change the fact that you can have a very deep emotional connection. This is going to happen. This is going to unfold in ways that we didn't expect. And a good example of that is the fact that we didn't envision that people in just these last years could become emotionally linked into their large language models and use them as friends and as psychologists. Where is this going to bring us in these next 10 years?
Mm.
That's pretty uncharted territory.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So yeah, just a correction again from our audience that men are affected by infertility as they get older. Yes, I know, and as a man in my 50, I'm aware of that. But I think again, it's again the physiology means the consequences for women arrive, I think, at an earlier age. But okay, and thanks, Leslie, for the clarification. It's come a little too late for me to put the question, but I understand it now, so that's nice. Thank you. Thank you for putting the question. So it just remains for me to say a big thank you to Ricard. I think that was an extraordinary and fascinating talk, and I'm very grateful that you were able to talk us through some of the questions and answer so many in such a short space of time. If you'd like to buy a book, a copy of Ricard's book, it's coming out next month, Endless Endings, The Many Forms of Death and What They Tell Us About Life. I'm contractually obliged to point you to Fox Lane Books, our sponsors. Other bookshops are available, but they're not quite as vulpine as Fox Lane. And so again, just remains me to say thank you very much to Ricard, thank you very much to the audience, and thank you very much for the organisers for arranging the event this evening.